I already threw that ugly ceramic vase out into the yard. It's bad luck, and it looks terrible in a modern house like this. If you want to keep it, go get it. Otherwise, just leave it there for the trash collectors." Melissa said it while standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her evening gown, a tight black dress that I would estimate cost no less than $800, holding a pair of gold earrings she hadn't yet put on. She didn't look at me even once. She said it the way people announce something unimportant. No emphasis, no pause, no need for a response. I stood in the doorway of the living room of the house at 16 Gaston Street, a 2-story Georgian Revival home, pale cream with green shutters, one of the finest houses on the historic streets of Savannah, the house Walter and I bought in 1992 and spent 30 years furnishing. This living room, with its red velvet curtains and the Georgia landscape mural I had commissioned, with the mahogany furniture Walter bought at an antique auction in Charleston in 2003. This room where my daughter-in-law now stood before the mirror, preparing for tonight's dinner party, a party I had not been invited to. I walked out through the back door, down the stone steps, and onto the lawn. The vase lay by the western fence next to the trash bin. It hadn't been thrown. Melissa was careful enough not to break anything that might make a loud noise, but placed there with the cold indifference of someone handling something they considered worthless. My name is Adele Grace Morrison. I am 66 years old. That vase, a turquoise ceramic piece with white dragon and cloud patterns, about 40 centimeters tall, thick and heavy, was given to me by my mother-in-law when she passed away in 1995. "Adele," Catherine Morrison said in her final week, "this vase has been in our family for a long time. You keep it." And now it lay beside the trash, on the lawn of a house that is legally mine, but has slowly, day by day, become someone else's. So this is how they repay me? The basement of 16 Gaston Street, Savannah, Georgia, has a 3-meter ceiling, enough light from 3 small ground-level windows, and the old wooden table set my children used when they were young still sits there because no one wants to bring it upstairs. That is where I ate dinner on the evening of Saturday, November 4th, 2023. Not because I was forbidden from eating upstairs. No one said that outright. But Melissa and Marcus's party, 20 guests, friends and business associates of my son in Savannah's real estate industry, began at 7. By 5 in the afternoon, the kitchen had already been taken over by a hired catering staff. By 6, guests began arriving, and the living room, dining room, and even the hallway with the wedding photograph of Walter and me, hanging there since 1981, were filled with people. People I did not know, talking about things I did not understand, drinking wine from the Waterford crystal glasses we had bought in Dublin in 2007. Melissa came to me at 5:30. "Mrs. Morrison, we have guests tonight. Could you stay downstairs? We've left your dinner there." Not a question, not a request, a statement. I went down to the basement. On the old wooden table sat a plate of food covered with plastic wrap, and beside it a glass of water. Above me, through the floorboards, I could hear soft jazz music and the laughter of guests being entertained with food, and wine from the kitchen of the house I had lived in for 31 years. I sat in the old wooden chair and ate alone. Evenings in Savannah in November are not very cold. This is still southern Georgia, humid and warm compared to the northern states. Through the small ground-level window, I could see people's feet moving across the backyard, women's heels, men's polished shoes, and in the corner by the western fence, I could see the ceramic vase lying still in the darkness. Before the story moves forward, I need to speak about Walter and the house, because what is happening now cannot be understood without what came before. Walter Ellis Morrison met me in 1978 at the Savannah College of Art and Design, where I was studying interior design and he was teaching architectural history. He was 42, I was 21, and everyone around us said it was an unusual match. We didn't care. Walter was Savannah-born. His family had lived in the city for 4 generations, the kind of family people in Savannah call Old Savannah, meaning those who built the city and understand it in a way newcomers cannot. Not in 1 generation, not in 2. He knew the history of every public square, every house in the historic district, every oak tree draped in Spanish moss along the shaded streets of Savannah. We married in 1981. And in 1983, Marcus, our only son, was born. In 1992, we bought the house at 16 Gaston Street. At the time, it needed major repairs, and we used most of our savings and borrowed more to afford it. Walter said, "Adele, this is the house we'll grow old in. We have to do it right." And we did it right. Every room, every detail, every wall hanging, and every piece of fabric was carefully chosen over many years. Walter paid special attention to Georgian architectural details. The cornices above the doors, the ceiling medallion in the living room, the oak staircase with its curved handrail. I focused on color, materials, and the small objects that make a space feel alive. Walter passed away in 2021. Prostate cancer, 3 years from diagnosis to the end. During those 3 years, I spent most of my time at his bedside, taking him to appointments. I'm managing his medication, cooking whatever he could still eat when chemotherapy began to take its toll. He died at 5 a.m. in our bedroom on the 2nd floor of 16 Gaston Street, his hand in mine. Marcus, my son, came as soon as he heard, and Melissa came with him. At the time, I was grateful not to be alone. Now I understand. I never noticed when that gratitude came to an end. Marcus Herbert Morrison, my son, 40 years old, is the intelligent and ambitious man Walter and I raised, sent to the University of Georgia, then to an MBA at Emory, and into a successful career in commercial real estate in Savannah. We were proud of him in the way parents are proud of a child who has done better than the generation before. Melissa Jong Morrison, Marcus's wife, 38, is a second-generation Korean-American woman raised in Atlanta, who studied law at Emory at the same time as Marcus and married him in 2012. She is intelligent, that cannot be denied. She built her own real estate consulting firm and earns well without depending on Marcus. But intelligence is not the same as kindness, and that is what I misunderstood for 11 years. After Walter died, Marcus and Melissa suggested they move in so Mom wouldn't be alone. I agreed. At the time, I was deep in grief, and the offer sounded like care. What I failed to notice clearly enough, they moved in as if it were their house, not mine with their presence. Melissa began rearranging the living room after 2 months to make it more modern. After 3 months, some of Walter's antiques disappeared from the study shelves. Melissa said they looked old and cluttered. After 6 months, dinner schedules were arranged around their time and needs, not mine. Marcus never objected to Melissa about anything, not because he didn't see, but because their marriage worked the way many modern marriages do. The one with the louder and more decisive voice wins. In this house, that was Melissa. I let it go on too long, not because I was weak, but because I was old and tired and disoriented after losing Walter, and because part of me did not want to create conflict in the only family I had left. And then, in November 2023, Walter's mother's vase was placed beside the trash, and I sat eating dinner alone in the basement while jazz music drifted down from above. I want to talk about the vase, not its value, which I did not yet know at the time, but what it meant to the Morrison family. Catherine Ann Morrison, my mother-in-law, was a Savannah woman born in 1925, the daughter of a small antique dealer on Bull Street. Walter's grandfather, Catherine's father, traded in antiques and curios in the old Savannah way. No polished storefront, no elegant catalog, just a network of people who had known one another for generations, exchanging objects in ways only those in the trade truly understood. The ceramic vase came into the Morrison family, according to Catherine, sometime around 1920, when Walter's grandfather purchased a lot of items from the estate of an old Georgia family, forced to sell belongings to pay debts after the economic downturn following World War I. The vase was part of that lot. No one knew where it originally came from. He bought it because it was beautiful and reasonably priced. The vase is ivory white with cobalt blue dragon and cloud patterns, hand-painted, about 40 centimeters tall with a slender neck and a gently flared rim in a classical style. For more than 100 years, it has stood in different places in Morrison homes, on mantels, bookshelves, dining tables. No one in the family ever knew its true origin. Catherine only knew that it was old, that it was beautiful, and that it belonged to the family. When she left it to me in 1995, I placed it in the living room of the Gaston Street house. It stood there for 28 years, on a cabinet pedestal beside the window overlooking Gaston Street, where the afternoon light made the cobalt blue glow in a way electric lighting never could. Melissa looked at it and saw an ugly, unlucky ceramic vase. Did they really think I had grown so senile that I couldn't see what was happening? I want to say more about Walter and about Savannah, because this story is incomplete without the picture of the man and the city that shaped me for 30 years. I also want to return to that Saturday night, November 4th, not to reopen the pain, but because the details of that evening reveal more clearly the logic Melissa operates by, the logic I needed to fully understand in order to understand what happened next. On Sunday, November 5th, I woke early out of habit and went out to the backyard to retrieve the vase. I did not want to leave it in the night dew any longer. Savannah mornings in November have a particular kind of light, soft, pale gold, filtered through a thin mist rising from the Savannah River, giving everything a certain muted color. In that light, the vase by the fence looked different than it had the night before. The cobalt blue pattern stood out with a sharpness that indoor lighting never revealed. "Excuse me, what is that?" A man's voice came from the east side of the fence between my yard and the sidewalk along Gaston Street. I turned to look. The man stood on the sidewalk, looking through the low wrought iron fence, the kind of decorative Victorian fencing common along Gaston Street, toward the vase. And he appeared to be around 65, with neatly trimmed gray hair, wearing a tweed jacket in the manner of an academic, and he was looking at the vase with an expression I would later recognize as that of someone who has just noticed something important. "A ceramic vase," I said. "It belongs to my family." "May I take a closer look?" he asked. "I'm James Whitfield. I work with Savannah antique appraisers, and I teach East Asian art history at SCAD." He handed me a business card through the fence. I looked at the card. Dr. James Whitfield, Ph.D., specialist in East Asian ceramics and decorative arts. Savannah antique appraisers. "You may come in," I said. Dr. Whitfield stepped through the small gate and approached the vase. He did not pick it up immediately. That I noticed, because someone who truly understands antiques does not rush to touch. He examined it from several angles first, from above, along the painted surface. He bent down to inspect the base. "May I see the bottom?" he asked. I lifted the vase carefully. I had always handled it carefully, even without knowing its true value, and turned it over for him. On the base was a small mark in a darker shade of blue, something I had seen many times but never understood. Dr. Whitfield looked at the mark in silence for about 30 seconds. Then he straightened and looked at me with the expression of someone carefully controlling his reaction. "Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice calm and deliberate, "I need to ask directly. This vase being left outside like this, is that acceptable? I mean, and in terms of its condition?" "It was put out here last night," I said. "Someone in the house said it was bad luck and made the place look worse." There was a brief pause. "I see. What do you think it is?" "I don't want to say anything before examining it more carefully," he said cautiously, "but I would suggest that you bring it to my office so I can evaluate it properly. And Mrs. Morrison," he looked me straight in the eye, "in the meantime, I strongly recommend you not leave it out here." On Monday morning, I brought the vase to Dr. Whitfield's office on Bull Street, one of Savannah's oldest streets, lined with ancient oak trees and 19th century brick buildings. His office was small and cluttered in the way of someone with too many books and documents, bookshelves running floor to ceiling on 3 sides, a desk covered in auction catalogs and printed images, and specialized lighting set up at different angles. Dr. Whitfield worked on the vase for nearly 2 hours. I sat waiting with a cup of coffee he had made for me. He used a magnifying glass, a UV light, took photographs from multiple angles, turned the vase over several times, opened a thick reference book and compared details one by one. Finally, he set the vase down and sat across from me. "Mrs. Morrison, I need to tell you plainly what I'm seeing, with the understanding that this is a preliminary assessment and must be confirmed by a higher-level specialist." "Please go ahead," I said. "This vase, based on what I observe, shows characteristics consistent with Chinese Ming Dynasty porcelain, specifically the Wanli period, which would place it in the late 16th century. The dragon and cloud motif, the quality of the cobalt glaze, the firing technique, all align. And the mark on the base," he pointed, "is the kind of rain mark used on high-end export porcelain of that period." I sat still. What does that mean in terms of value? If confirmed authentic, Dr. Whitfield said, a Ming Wanli porcelain vase in good condition, and this one appears largely intact. I see no repairs or cracks. Could be valued anywhere from $800,000 to over $1 million at major auction houses. Silence filled the small office. I said nothing for about 30 seconds, not because I didn't believe him, but because I was processing something more complicated than simple astonishment. The image of that vase lying beside the trash bin in my yard on a November night, while I sat eating dinner alone in the basement. Over $1 million, I finally said, and someone put it next to the trash because they thought it was bad luck. Dr. Whitfield looked at me for a moment. Then he said something I would never forget. There are things that look like trash until you know their true value. On Wednesday, November 8th, I drove up to Atlanta with Dr. Whitfield to meet a specialist at Sotheby's. It wasn't an easy decision, not physically or emotionally, but practically. I needed to take the vase out of the house without anyone noticing. Marcus and Melissa left early for work, and I packed the vase into an old cardboard box with layers of newspaper, then placed it into a plain fabric bag before Dr. Whitfield arrived to pick me up at 7 in the morning. The Sotheby's Atlanta office was in Buckhead, the upscale northern district of the city. Glass and granite offices, people in suits moving with the quiet confidence of those who know their work matters. The specialist who received us was Sarah Chen, a Chinese-American woman in her 50s, with short black hair and sharp, observant eyes. Ms. Chen examined the vase more thoroughly than Dr. Whitfield, using X-ray fluorescence equipment to analyze the glaze composition, a microscope to study the fired clay structure, and comparing the dragon motifs against Sotheby's internal Ming porcelain image database. 3 hours later, she reached her conclusion. This is a Ming Dynasty vase, Wanli period, approximately 1580 to 1590. The base mark confirms it as high-grade export porcelain, pieces made specifically for international markets, commissioned by Portuguese and Dutch traders at the time. Its state of preservation is unusually good for an artifact of this kind. I would estimate its current market value between $1 million and $1.5 million. When can it go to auction? I asked. She glanced at her calendar. We have an Asian art auction on November 17th, and if you wish to include it, we can process the paperwork this week. I looked at Dr. Whitfield. He nodded. All right, I said. Let's do it. The Sotheby's Atlanta auction on the evening of November 17th took place in a formal auction room in Buckhead, with about 80 attendees in person, and an unknown number of bidders participating by phone and online from Asia and Europe. I sat in the back row with Dr. Whitfield. He had accompanied me through this entire process with a patience and professionalism I deeply appreciated. Bright lights illuminated each lot on stage. The vase was lot number 12 that evening. Opening bid, $600,000. The first bidder, a dealer from New York. The second, the auctioneer reading a bid from the phone, likely a buyer from Asia. The price climbed quickly. $700,000, $800,000, $900,000. At $1 million, only 2 bidders remained, the New York dealer and the phone bidder. I sat still, hands resting on my lap, eyes fixed forward. 1,200,000, 1,300,000, $1,400,000. The hammer fell at $1,450,000. After auction fees and taxes, the amount I received, $1,170,000. Dr. Whitfield placed his hand on my arm. "Congratulations, Mrs. Morrison." I sat with that number in my mind, $1,170,000. From the vase my daughter-in-law had placed beside the trash because she thought it was bad luck and ugly. The week after the auction, I met Rebecca Kim at her office on Drayton Street. Rebecca Kim, a real estate attorney, 49 years old, someone I had worked with on a few small transactions involving Walter's estate, listened without interrupting for nearly 20 minutes as I explained the situation. "What would you like to do?" she asked when I finished. "I want to buy 14 Gaston Street," I said. Rebecca looked up. "The house across the street?" "Yes, the one directly across from number 16, where I'm living now. I've known the owners for years. The Harringtons are looking to sell because Mr. Harrington needs to move into assisted living. They haven't listed it publicly yet." "What's its estimated value?" "I believe around $800,000 to $900,000, depending on condition. And I want you to contact them and see if we can negotiate directly. No agent, no public listing." Rebecca nodded. "That's entirely possible. Would you like me to know more about why you want to buy it?" "I want a place to live," I said simply. "A place that is mine, and mine alone, where no one makes me eat dinner in the basement of my own house." Rebecca looked at me for about 3 seconds. Then she nodded and picked up her pen. Maria Lopez had worked in the house at 16 Gaston Street since 2015, 8 years, starting as a housekeeper and nanny when Marcus and Melissa had their first child. A 48-year-old woman from El Salvador, she was diligent and honest in a way I had come to trust after 8 years. I met Maria in the backyard while Melissa was out meeting a client, and Marcus was in a meeting. I spoke to her directly. "Maria, I'm moving into the house across the street. I'd like to ask if you'd be willing to work for me. I'll pay you what you're earning here, plus 20%. Maria looked at me. Then she looked at the house at number 16, then back at me. "Mrs. Morrison," she said, her voice low and clear, "I've worked here for 8 years. You have treated me well." She has not. "You don't need long to think about it," I said. I don't need to think," Maria said. "I accept." Walter Ellis Morrison taught architectural history, but he lived architecture in a way different from most scholars. He didn't see architecture as abstract objects, but as evidence of how people lived in a specific time and place. "Adele," he would often say, "every old house is an untranslated book. You have to know how to read it." He taught me how to read Savannah in that sense, how to see the Oglethorpe plan with its neat squares, not as random design, but as social philosophy built into space, how to recognize Federal, Greek Revival, Italianate, and Victorian styles in the houses along the old streets, how to hear the story of each material. Savannah gray brick, with its distinctive color from local clay, cypress wood in the floors from Georgia forests, pine blue granite in the sidewalks brought as ballast on trading ships. In the quiet days of packing before moving to number 14, I walked through every room of number 16 and sat in each one for a while, not out of sadness in the sense of being unable to go on, but because I wanted to say goodbye properly. That is how I love Savannah, not just for its postcard beauty, but because it is a place that can be read through its material layers. And that is why I cannot leave the city even when number 16 is no longer a place where I can live in peace. Walter died in the second-floor bedroom of 16 Gaston. After he passed, there was a brief time when I considered leaving Savannah, moving closer to Marcus and Melissa, though they were not far, but leaving the house and the neighborhood. In the end, I did not, because I understood. Savannah is where Walter still exists in some sense that nowhere else holds. And now, and from 14 Gaston Street, I am still in Savannah. I still look out at the oak trees draped in Spanish moss and the orderly squares of the Oglethorpe plan from 1733. Walter is still here in that sense. For this story to be honest, I need to speak about the signs I ignored over 11 years of knowing Melissa. Not to blame myself, but to acknowledge that stories rarely begin at their breaking point. They begin with small things accumulating over time. Melissa is intelligent, and that is true. She is also a perfectionist, and that is true as well. Perfectionism is not a flaw, but when it applies not only to work, but to people and living spaces, it can become something difficult to live with. The first sign I remember, Marcus and Melissa's wedding in 2012. I offered to help with preparations. I had experience organizing events and knew Savannah well enough to suggest good venues. Melissa thanked me politely and said she had hired a professional wedding planner. Not wrong, but the way she said it made me understand that my involvement was not desired, only minimally tolerated. The second sign, in 2015, when they were still living in their own apartment, and I visited for the first time after they moved in. Melissa had decorated the apartment in a modern minimalist style, everything white and gray and sharp-edged. Not my style, but it was their home, and I had no objection. What I noticed was when I gave them an antique Wedgwood plate I found at a flea market, something I thought was beautiful and valuable. Melissa thanked me and put it in a cabinet, not displayed, not used, just stored away. Those small signs I interpreted generously. Each generation has its own aesthetic, each person their own way of living. I did not want to be the interfering, imposing mother-in-law. But when Marcus and Melissa moved into number 16 after Walter died, what I got wrong was this. I continued applying the same logic. Everyone has their own way of living, to a completely different situation. They were not living in their own space. They were living in mine. That is the fundamental distinction I failed to keep clear enough in my mind. I want to say more about Dr. James Whitfield, because he is important to this story in a way that goes beyond the role of an expert. James Whitfield has studied Asian porcelain for 40 years, from his time as a graduate student at Yale, through years working with Sotheby's and Christie's in New York and London, to his decision to return to teaching at SCAD Savannah 15 years ago, because he preferred Savannah and teaching to the market. I could make more money if I stayed in New York, he told me over afternoon tea, but money isn't the only thing of value. What he explained to me about the vase, and this stayed with me because it changed how I understood what had happened, was that what made the vase special was not just its age or condition, but its story. Chinese export porcelain from the Wanli period of the Ming Dynasty was made to order for European merchants, primarily Portuguese and Dutch, who controlled Asia-Europe maritime trade in the late 16th century. These vases and plates were produced in the kilns of Jingdezhen in Jiangxi province using hybrid designs, dragon and cloud motifs from Chinese art, but shapes and sizes according to European demand. Your vase, Dr. Whitfield said, is the product of an encounter between two worlds, Chinese craftsmen executing an order for Portuguese buyers for a market no one fully understood. That is why it has value not only artistically, but historically. From Portugal or the Netherlands, the vase traveled somewhere over more than 400 years before arriving in Savannah and the Morrison family. That journey is the story, Doctor. In Whitfield is trying to reconstruct in his academic paper. I think about that, a vase that began in the hands of a craftsman in Jingdezhen, traveled across seas and through many hands, across centuries and historical events, and eventually stood on a cabinet pedestal by the living room window at 16 Gaston Street, Savannah, Georgia, and then was placed beside a trash bin because it was considered bad luck. Something that can endure 400 years of history clearly has a strength of its own. When I asked Maria Lopez if she wanted to come work for me, she agreed almost immediately. I didn't ask why at the time. But later, when we had grown more familiar and often talked while cooking or gardening, she told me what she had seen over 8 years. Mrs. Morrison, Maria said one December afternoon as we sat in the kitchen, I saw many things in those 8 years. The way she spoke to you, the way she made decisions without asking you, the way you sat at the kitchen table alone while they had dinner with friends in the dining room. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, not as an accusation, but out of curiosity. Because it wasn't my place, she said plainly. I am the housekeeper. If I spoke, I would lose my job, and I have a family to support. She looked at me. But when you asked if I wanted to come here, I knew immediately this was the moment I could choose the right side without losing anything. I sat with that. The right side from someone who had watched enough to know which side was right, even if she could not speak for 8 years. What I am grateful to Maria for is not only that she came to work for me, it is that she reminded me there are always people observing, people who see the truth even when no one asks for their opinion. From November 17th to December 4th, I lived in the house at 16 Gaston Street with a strange sense of calm. Not the calm of someone who has given up or accepted their circumstances, but the calm of someone who knows they are preparing for something and that everything is unfolding according to plan. I did not change my daily routine. I still woke up early, still had breakfast in the kitchen, still did the things I usually did. But in the evenings, after Marcus and Melissa went to sleep, I sat in the small bedroom at the end of the hallway, the room I had moved into after the master bedroom became Marcus and Melissa's, under an arrangement that was supposed to be temporary, but became permanent, and I planned. The planning was not complicated. Simply this: how much money I had, how much I needed, what I wanted and did not want. Hardy Vase had brought me $1,170,000. Number 14. Gaston Street cost $860,000. That left over $300,000, enough to live well, enough to furnish a new home, enough not to worry for several years. I also prepared mentally something no one talks about, yet just as important. 31 years in one house, 3 years of losing Walter and living with that loss. Nearly 3 years of Melissa and Marcus gradually shrinking my space. Leaving all of that behind is not easy, even when you know it is the right thing to do. But I am past the age where ease is the only criterion for making decisions. I am 66 years old, and I know that dignity is not something you lose gradually without noticing, unless you choose not to pay attention. I paid attention, and I acted. During the 2 hours I sat in the basement, I heard many things through the wooden floor. Not clearly, the sound was filtered and distorted, but enough to imagine. Melissa's loud laughter, the kind she used when entertaining guests, higher pitched than usual, open and enthusiastic, in just the right measure to make a good impression. Marcus talking about their new real estate project on Tybee Island, the clinking of crystal glasses, and once, through the music and conversation, I heard someone ask Melissa, "Your house is beautiful. Did you decorate it yourself or hire a designer?" On Wednesday, November 29, 2023, I signed the contract to purchase the house at 14 Gaston Street, Savannah, Georgia, for $860,000. Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, people I had known for 30 years, living on this street, agreed to sell directly without a broker. Theodore Harrington, 83, shook my hand after signing and said, "Adele, we didn't want to sell to strangers. We're glad this house is going to you." I did not tell Marcus and Melissa about this until Monday, December 4th, the day I moved out. Before that, I quietly packed my belongings, clothes, books, family photos, the personal items I had lived with for 30 years. Nothing more than what was truly mine. Walter's mahogany dining set, the one we had bought together, was shared property, but I chose not to argue about it at this time. I had enough money to buy new things, and enough taste to decorate my home the way I wanted. On the morning of December 4th, while Marcus and Melissa were having breakfast, I walked into the dining room with an envelope. "Mom, what is it?" Marcus asked, slightly surprised. "I'm moving to a new house today," I said. 14 Gaston Street, across the street. I placed the envelope on the table. "These are the documents for this house. According to your father's will, 16 Gaston Street belongs jointly to him and me. Half is mine. If you wish to continue living here, you will need to reach an agreement with me under legal terms." Melissa set her coffee cup down. "Where did you get the money to buy a house?" she asked. Her tone changed, but still controlled. "From the ceramic vase you placed next to the trash," I said. "The Ming Dynasty porcelain vase that Sotheby's Atlanta auctioned for $1,450,000 on November 17th. The dining room fell completely silent. Marcus looked at me, looked at Melissa, then back at me. "Are you serious?" "I am not in the habit of saying things that aren't true," I said, "especially about important matters." Melissa said nothing. Her face, the face of an undeniably intelligent woman, was doing something I had never seen before, accepting the reality of the consequences of a wrong decision. "Mom," Marcus said, his voice completely changed, "You need time to think about what's in that envelope," I said. "I'll be at number 14. My door is always open to Marcus. You are my son. As for everything else, Rebecca Kim, my attorney, will be in touch." I left the dining room and walked out of 16 Gaston Street for the last time as someone who lived there. The house at 14 Gaston Street is an Italian at home, built in 1875, one story lower than number 16, but wider, with a veranda wrapping around three sides, and tall arched windows characteristic of Italianate architecture. The Harringtons had lived there for 40 years and maintained it carefully. The structure was sound, the electrical and plumbing systems updated, needing only redecorating to suit personal taste. That is what I know how to do best. 30 years of shaping interiors alongside Walter had given me both experience and confidence. Maria Lopez began working for me in the very first week. She came every morning, helped me organize, cooked lunch and dinner, and over time became someone I talked to in the afternoons in the kitchen. I decorated the house in my own way, not in the modern style Melissa preferred, not according to any trend, according to memory, feeling, and the things Walter and I had learned to love over 30 years in Savannah. Warm colors, natural fabrics, wooden furniture with history, and natural light from tall windows. In the living room, I placed a pedestal cabinet near the window overlooking Gaston Street, exactly where the vase had stood in the living room of number 16 for 28 years. The pedestal is empty. The vase is no longer there. It is now in a private collection in Singapore, according to what Sotheby's told me about the buyer. But I keep that pedestal empty because looking at it reminds me of something. I am writing these lines on a December afternoon, sitting in the armchair by the living room window at 14 Gaston Street. Savannah in December afternoons has a particular pale golden light, not the harsh brightness of summer, but a warm, slanting winter light that brings out the depth and beauty of the old brick houses along Gaston Street in a way unique to this city. Through the window, I look across at 16 Gaston Street, the pale cream house with green shutters where I lived for 31 years. The living room lights are on. Shadows move behind the curtains. Marcus called me 3 weeks ago, the first time since I left. He said he wanted to see me. I invited him over to number 14. We sat in my new living room over coffee, and he said, "Mom, I'm sorry." Not because Melissa asked him to, I could tell, and because he had truly realized something. I listened to his apology. I did not say it's okay, because it is not okay, but I said, "You are my son. This door will always be open to you." Melissa has not come to see me. That is her choice. Legally, Rebecca Kim is handling matters. My half-ownership of 16 Gaston Street under Walter's will still needs to be resolved. Marcus and Melissa may buy out my share at market value, which would give them full ownership of the house. Or there may be another resolution. That is now a legal and financial matter, not an emotional one. I am calm enough to keep those two separate. Dr. James Whitfield and I have had many afternoon teas since November. He is writing an academic paper on the provenance of the vase, from the kilns of Jingdezhen, China, in the late 16th century, to Portuguese traders, across the Atlantic to somewhere in the American South, and finally to the Morrison family in Savannah. I help him with what I know of the family's history. Looking back on this story, there are things I want to say, not as lessons, but as truths I have learned. First, about value and understanding. The vase had been in the Morrison family for over 100 years, and no one knew its true worth. That does not make those who didn't know bad. People cannot know what they have never been taught. What makes this story tragic is the attitude, Melissa decided something had no value simply because she did not recognize its value. Those are two different things, not knowing and assuming something is worthless. Second, about power and boundaries. I remained silent for too long, not out of weakness, but because I confused patience within a family with the surrender of my own dignity. Patience is good when it comes from strength and love. When it comes from loneliness and not knowing what to hold on to, it is no longer patience. It is the slow loss of oneself. Third, and this matters most to me, things that truly have value do not need to display that value outwardly in order to be valuable. The vase stood in my living room for 28 years, without anyone knowing it was Ming porcelain. It was still Ming porcelain all that time. Its value did not depend on whether anyone recognized it. It only required the right person at the right moment to stand before it. I believe that is true of people as well. A December afternoon in Savannah. The street lights begin to glow along Gaston Street. The oak trees draped in Spanish moss cast long shadows over the stone sidewalks. Maria is in the kitchen preparing dinner. I can hear the rhythm of her knife and the scent of herbs drifting in. I sit in my armchair by the window, sipping tea, looking across the street at number 16, not with hostility nor with satisfaction, just looking in the way one looks at a place that was once home and understands that home is not the walls, but what you carry within yourself. There are things that look like trash until you understand their true value. The vase taught me that. And from that November evening when I sat alone in the basement eating dinner, I learned something else. People treat you the way you allow them to treat you. When you change that, not through revenge, but through clarity and action, everything changes. I'm 66 years old. I have a new house on Gaston Street, Savannah. I have Maria in the kitchen, Dr. Whitfield for afternoon tea, and Rebecca Kim handling the legal matters that need handling. I have the empty pedestal by the living room window to remind me of the vase and of everything that has happened. And I have Savannah, the city Walter and I loved, the city of public squares and moss-draped oaks and historic streets, where no matter how long you live here, there are always corners left to discover. That is enough. In truth, that is more than enough. Living room. I stand where the pedestal once held the vase and look out the window onto Gaston Street. For 31 years, this window has faced the same corner. The oak trees have grown taller. The houses across the street have been repainted several times, but the basic composition remains unchanged. Gaston Street, Forsyth Square in the distance, the Savannah sky. Dining room. Walter's mahogany table is still there, the one we bought at an auction in Charleston and brought home in a rented truck, with Walter having to remove the legs because it wouldn't fit through the door. So many meals there, Christmas, Thanksgiving, birthdays, ordinary dinners. Now it is Marcus and Melissa's table. I left it not because I didn't want it, but because I understand that sometimes leaving physical things behind is a way of keeping memories in another form, not in the object, but within oneself. Walter's study, the small upstairs room with bookshelves and the old wooden desk where he used to write. After he passed, I rarely entered, not because I didn't want to, but because each time I did, I could still see him sitting there in a way I cannot explain. Now Melissa has turned it into a storage room for her business files. I took two things, the family photograph from the wall and the brass desk lamp Walter bought from an antique shop in Charleston. Just those two. The master bedroom where Walter died. I do not enter that room. Not because I cannot, but because I choose not to. It now belongs fully and unquestionably to Marcus and Melissa. I have no need to look back at it. Memories do not live in rooms. They live in me. I carry them with me. I did not tell Marcus about the Sotheby's auction until the day I moved out, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I wanted enough time to complete everything before facing questions and reactions. What I knew was this: if Marcus knew beforehand, he would tell Melissa. And Melissa, intelligent and decisive, would find a way to intervene, not necessarily out of ill intent. She might believe the money from the vase should be managed in a way she considered appropriate. Or she might think the vase, even if technically mine, was somehow tied to the family's shared assets. I consulted Rebecca Kim before the auction. She was very clear. The vase was a personal gift to you from your mother-in-law, not marital property, not shared family property, and unrelated to Walter's estate. You have full right to sell it without notifying or seeking permission from anyone. I knew that. But knowing legally and avoiding family complications are two different things. So I stayed silent until everything was done. The only thing I regret is that the vase is no longer here. Not regret about the money. The money achieved what I needed. But regret in the sense that I wish the vase were still there, standing where it belonged by the window, seen the way it deserved to be seen. At the same time, I know there is something right in the fact that the vase he left as I did. We both found places more worthy of us. The house at 14 Gaston Street, Savannah. I had looked at it from the window of number 16 for 31 years, without ever imagining that one day I would live there. From the ground floor looking out, the veranda wrapping around three sides is what I love most. The Harringtons planted climbing flowers along it, a yellow climbing rose that now winds its way from the base of the columns up the trellis above. December is not its blooming season, but the vines are still green, and their structure shows how beautiful it will be in spring. I decorate each room at my own pace. No rush, no deadlines. A chair here, a rug there, a painting when I find the right one. I buy some new pieces, and some from antique shops in Savannah, the kind of objects with history, the kind Walter and I always loved. Doctor. Whitfield brought me a small gift in my first week at number 14, a book on Chinese export porcelain with a blue cover, filled with detailed images from different periods and styles. So you can learn more about your old friend, he said, meaning the vase. I placed the book on the empty pedestal by the living room window, the one I had kept empty as a kind of placeholder. Now it is no longer empty. Not the vase, but the story of the vase, in paper and ink. I think Walter's mother, Catherine Ann Morrison, would not be surprised by what has happened. She was a woman of old Savannah, someone who understood that things of value rarely need to advertise themselves. She gave me the vase not because she knew its monetary worth. She did not, just as I did not for 28 years. And she gave it to me because she trusted I would care for it properly. I believe I did, though properly turned out to mean something different from what any of us had imagined. I heard Melissa answer, "We completely renovated it. I did it myself with an assigned designer. It used to be my in-laws' house, very outdated, so everything had to be redone. My in-laws' old house, not my mother-in-law's house, where she still lives. Not my late father-in-law and mother-in-law's home, but my in-laws' old house, the way people speak about something they have taken over and reshaped as their own. I sat with that sentence in the quiet of the basement, and I thought, this did not happen suddenly. This was built over time, layer by layer, and now it had become solid enough to be said openly in front of guests. That was when I knew this situation would not resolve itself. It required action. There is something I have not said. Walter knew more about the vase than I realized. In 2017, 4 years before he passed, when he was still teaching and his health was relatively stable, he spent an afternoon reading about Chinese porcelain and taking notes in a small notebook. I found that notebook while packing before moving to number 14. His note about the vase, 5-clawed dragon motif, characteristic of imperial or high-grade export porcelain of the Ming Dynasty, deep cobalt color, hand-painted. Need to examine base mark to determine specific period. Consult an expert when possible. He had noticed. He had studied. He had written with the intention of asking further. But his illness progressed, and when possible, never came. I read that notebook and felt Walter there in the familiar way, still observing, still learning, still noticing the small details others overlooked. And he had seen something in the vase that others had not. I showed the notebook to Dr. Whitfield. He read Walter's note and said, he was on the right track. 5-clawed dragon is an accurate observation. That is a distinguishing feature of high-grade porcelain from that period. He understood antiques. He taught architectural and art history, I said. That's a strong foundation, Dr. Whitfield replied. People with an eye for things tend to see what others cannot, regardless of the specific field. I keep that notebook on the pedestal beside the book Dr. Whitfield gave me. The two together, Walter's notes and the story of the vase, are what I look at each morning with my coffee. On the morning of December 4th, when I drove back to number 16 after officially receiving the keys to number 14, I sat in the car for a while before going inside. A December morning in Savannah has a particular kind of air. Cool but not cold, humid but not unpleasant, carrying the scent of oak trees, damp earth, and somewhere in the distance, the faint trace of the sea from the Savannah River. The kind of morning that makes people remember Savannah for what it is. I thought about the story from beginning to now, not as a summary or arrangement, but as a feeling of it all in a single moment. From that November evening when I sat alone in the basement eating dinner, to the morning Dr. Whitfield stood outside the fence looking at the vase, to the dim auction room at Sotheby's Atlanta with the hammer falling at $1,450,000, to this morning, sitting in my car in front of my house for the last time before it officially ceased to be my only home. And I thought of Walter's mother, Catherine Morrison, with the vase she had kept all her life and passed on to me. She did not know its monetary value, but she knew something more important, that it belonged to the right person. Sometimes the right thing happens in a way no one plans. Melissa placed the vase beside the trash. Dr. Whitfield happened to walk down Gaston Street that very morning. I stepped out into the yard at just the right moment. Call it luck, or call it something else. I do not need an answer. I only need to know this. I did not miss the moment when it arrived. During one of my meetings with Rebecca Kim to finalize the paperwork for number 14, she said something I did not expect from a practical lawyer. Adele, she said. She had begun calling me by my first name after we had worked together for some time. In all my years working in real estate and inheritance law, the thing I see most often is this. Women often do not know what they own, not because they are foolish, but because people don't usually tell women those things. She looked at me. Did you know that half of 16 Gaston belongs to you under Mr. Morrison's will? I knew, I said, but I never acted on it. Exactly, and that allowed others to act in your place for 2 years. She did not say this in a judgmental way. I'm not saying you were wrong, but now you know, and now we act. That sentence, now you know, and now we act, is something I often think about afterward when speaking with other women in similar situations. Not every story has a Ming porcelain vase to solve financial problems, but every story begins at the same point, knowing what you own and being willing to act on it. I have lived in Savannah for more than 40 years, from when I arrived to study at SCAD in 1978 until now. I have seen Savannah change in many ways. The historic district becoming more popular with tourists, new restaurants and hotels appearing, old streets turning into destinations for young people, artists, and entrepreneurs. But there are things that do not change. The oak trees along Bull Street, Abercorn, and Gaston still hang with Spanish moss in the way only Savannah has. The public squares in the Oglethorpe plan remain places where people sit in the shade to read or talk. December air still carries that gentle warmth of southern Georgia, unlike any December in the north. Gaston Street, the long street running along the southern edge of Forsyth Park, is one I know house by house. I know who lives there, when they move, who arrives, which homes are being restored, and which are up for sale. From the window of number 14, I look at number 16 every day. Not to watch, not out of lingering pain, but because number 16 is part of Gaston Street, and Gaston Street is part of Savannah, and Savannah is my home. Walter once said Savannah is a city people don't leave, not because they can't, but because they don't want to. He was right. I stay in Savannah not because I have no choice, but because I do not want to be anywhere else. And now I live at 14 Gaston Street, still on Gaston, still in Savannah, still among the oaks and Spanish moss and southern air, only from a different angle. While packing to move, I had to make many small decisions about what to take and what to leave. Walter's mahogany dining set, the one we bought at an auction in Charleston and brought home in a rented truck, was the one I thought about the longest. Legally, it was marital property and part of Walter's estate. Under the will, a portion of that estate belonged to me, but I left the table behind, not because I did not want it, not because I did not have the right, but because I asked myself something simpler. Did I want to see that table every day in my new home? The answer was no, not because it was not beautiful, but because I wanted number 14 to be something entirely new, not a continuation of number 16. My memories of Walter are not in the table. They are in me. I carry them with me. And in leaving the table does not mean leaving anything behind. I left the mahogany set. I took the family photograph, the brass desk lamp, Walter's notebook, and some of my own books. That was enough. At number 14, I bought a smaller dining table from an antique shop on Price Street. Cherry wood, seating 6, simple in design but well made. It belongs to this house, not carried over from another. That is what I have learned about starting over at 66. Starting over does not mean discarding the past. It means choosing what you truly want to carry with you and leaving behind what you can create anew, perhaps even better.